Hello and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm your host, Brian, and today we are going to be discussing the third part of a video response series that I've been doing on Erica's video, Young Earth Creationism is Impossible, the Heat Problem video that Erica made. And this is the third and final part, and we are starting that right now. All right. So, without further ado, let me explain this background here. I got Noah's flood in the background here. You can see that. I haven't used Streamlabs OBS in a while to make a video, so I had to make one with it. Had to do my the green screen effect for my green screen behind me, but um, I wanted to replace it with a picture or an image. Figured out how to do that in OBS, but I was so concerned with doing that I didn't really pay attention to another video on YouTube about how to remove this shadow right here. You can see the shadow, is it right here? Yeah, shadow right here from my green screen. There's a way to remove it, but I started to think about it, and I kind of like it. It looks like I have a board behind me of Noah's Flood, and the shadows against that board. That's what it looks like, doesn't it? So I kind of like it. So, but we'll see. Mentioned at the beginning of the series, I think, that I'm not doing the whole video. That's not my intention. I am just playing enough so you can get the general idea of how bad the arguments are in this video. And of course, I have my own heat problem model, right? The GTF model, the geothermal feedback model, and then in the GTF model, it shows that the heat would have been able to be mitigated over time. It spreads it apart. It's thermally driven. It's a positive feedback loop. Um, and so it's driven by the very heat that's being generated, of course. It evacs all that heat into the upper mantle, and most of it gets absorbed by the mantle because the mantle is a powerful heat sink, and some of it gets expelled by volcanic eruptions, where some of it goes into the stratosphere, some of it goes into the floodwaters, um, and the water itself, the heat in the water actually removes heat all throughout the flood because heat actually removes when it evaporates. And this is latent heat removal, and so the hotter it is, the faster it evaporates. The faster it removes that heat. And so there's heat that's moving from that, and of course you got heat that's radiating out into space, as per Stephen-Boltzmann's law, and that sort of thing, all throughout the flood year and following the flood year, because my system doesn't stop at the flood year. Most of the heat is effectively removed from their problem areas by the time at the end of the flood. That doesn't mean there's not heat still in the water. That does not mean there's not some heat still in the atmosphere. It just simply means that most of the heat has been effectively removed and mitigated and stretched out, regulated to a point where it's not all concentrated in one particular area. All the heat is removed from the crust very, very fast. This happens because mantle convection, when heated up, actually speeds up convection. When that happens, it triggers high-speed advection into the crust, and it will move the heated crustal material really fast. I know some people had some um, misunderstandings of what advection is. That happens quite often. They thought that it was like me flowing the heat. Like, wait a minute, this second law of thermodynamics can't do that. And I was like, no, 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 no. In advection, doesn't have to follow temperature gradients because it's not the direct flow of heat. The heat is in the crustal rock itself, and it's moving. So the crustal rock itself is moving really fast into the upper mantle. And so that's the important part. But the two fundamentals of my model is one, that the system is thermally driven, and two, it is a positive feedback loop system, and all the components work together to alleviate the heat over time. It's a very powerful model. Critics have been trying to refute it ever since it came out. They've not been able to do it yet, and I'm still waiting for them to to make a attempt that actually does it. One critic recently gave a very interesting one. This was a fresh idea of going to the micro level, so of conduction involving zircon crystals, and so it was an interesting one. But once the math and physics was corrected, my model still worked. So it was it was a fresh idea, and I will give him that. I'm glad he did. He came up with the argument, but it just didn't work once everything was refactored back in. Once the math was done, once the physics was understood correctly, and the model still worked regardless. Um, but it was an interesting objection, probably the most interesting one so far. Um, we'll see what others have come up with eventually. Um, I'm glad that he didn't hound on Stephen Boltzmann's law. I've refuted the idea that Stephen Boltzmann's law has proved my position uh, to the grave at this point. It is done. My model works, and it works with Stephen Boltzmann's law. It doesn't disprove it. The heat could have gone away yesterday. It wouldn't have mattered in my model, but the point is, it didn't affect it any. Um, and so I'm glad that at least he moved away from that argument, and I don't know if the other critics are going to move away from that argument or not. But it was a fresh take, and I was appreciative of him bringing the argument up because it was something new, something unique, something no one else has even thought of or claimed in the comments, and so it was an interesting challenge to address. So I'm sure he'll probably do that again and do that some more, but I hope he doesn't do it ad nauseum because I do think that the physics and math, once it's corrected, makes the model work. Trying to do that on the micro scale, it just didn't work out in the end. Once everything was factored back in. Um, and that's what you have to do. You have to go back to looking at the math, the physics, the arguments, what the model actually says, and the various components that are being used in the model. You have to consider catastrophic conditions of the global flood, something obviously the critics are not considering when they argue their position. But since this is a global flood, you have to consider that as well. Um, but anyway, on with the discussion. Let's jump right into the video.
In fact, Vardman's right, because we have the brute numbers for what it would take energy wise to boil off the oceans or vaporize them off instantly. To get all the oceans boiling, we need 5.6 times 10 raised 26 joules, and to vaporize them off instantly, we need 3.7 times 10 raised 27 joules. Both our 4.5 billion number of accelerated nuclear decay and our 500 million number of accelerated nuclear decay easily get us there.
Okay, those numbers that are floating on, you can actually find those on the internet as well. They would actually be true if, if under certain assumptions like that the heat build up uncontrollably for an entire year, that it was all deposited into the water, and if the physics allowed for all of the oceans to be boiled. That one, I'm going to explain this in a minute because David Winsberg had actually talked about this on Standing for Truth, and he raises some good points. I don't remember all of them exactly. I should have probably reviewed that clip a little bit more, what he says on that. But I think that he does. I do remember him saying something about how the physics does not allow the atmosphere to actually hold that much water, and I agree with him on that. It doesn't. But we'll get into that in a second. I want to point out the first two first because I have been talking about this since the beginning that this is an assumption. You have to assume that it builds up to that year's worth. Um, unless you're assuming it's got dumped all that amount, a year's worth of heat, in 2 seconds or something, or a nanosecond or something like that. You have to assume it builds up over time in 1 year. Okay, that's an assumption. Now, some critics think that if they do not recognize the fact that they're doing that assumption, that automatically means they're not doing it. That's not true. Assumptions can be implied in an argument. if you're making that argument, if you're looking at a year's worth of heat and you're saying that's enough to boil the oceans, that has to assume that you are that heat is building up without a mechanism. Because if you assume a mechanism to get rid of the heat as it is generating, then you don't assume it's going to boil the oceans when it gets to that point. Okay, the only reason you would assume that it's going to boil the oceans when it gets to that point is if you're assuming that all that heat is generating with and building up uncontrollably without any mechanism to get rid of it. Another thing is that it also assumes it's all being dumped into the water. What's wrong with that? Well, most of this heat is probably likely to be interior because of accelerated nuclear decay. Even Erica agrees that most of the heat is accelerated nuclear decay. Okay? Um, so you'd either have to assume that all this heat is traveling to the surface somehow, or you know somehow, some way. But we know that the mantle can act as a heat sink, so this is false. So to assume that, because most of this heat is going to be interior. So the main problem that I can see, at least, is going to either be in the crust or in the floodwaters. But in the floodwaters, it wouldn't really be that much heat, problem, at least not from my model, because only some of the heat's going in the water, floodwaters. I don't claim that all the heat is being deposited in the water. Now, there's another problem, physics issue. Is it even possible to boil all the oceans off if you have that much heat? See, here's the thing: our atmosphere can only hold a certain amount of water. Our atmosphere can only hold a certain amount of water. Um, and I think it's like less than 2%, of what we got. Okay, we can't sit there and evaporate the entire water. Now, what you could do is you could get the oceans boiling. Some of it would evaporate into the atmosphere, obviously, and it would lower the level that we have for the time being, and obviously it would bubble. It would be boiling temperatures, but it wouldn't actually boil all the oceans away. It can't, because our atmosphere cannot hold physically. We know from physics, from atmospheric physics, that our atmosphere can't hold that much water. Okay, we have mechanisms that are going on during the flood that constantly replenishes the atmosphere of water throughout the global flood. So we don't claim that all that it's holding up all that water and it's coming down or something. We claim that it's replenishing it. Okay, so this follows through with atmospheric physics, which only claims that it can only hold a certain amount of water at one given time. So in other words, it does not have the ability or capacity to hold all the oceans as a result. So the most you could do is probably bubble it and evaporate some of the water, yeah, make the oceans shallower, but it wouldn't actually boil all the oceans. So there's a physics issue there that obviously wouldn't actually happen. Um, Now, if you assume that if you can just bypass physics there and assume that all the heat is depositing into the floodwaters and assume that it's building up for 1 year uncontrollably without any mechanism to get rid of the heat as it is generating. I had to add this in editing. I actually finished the entire thing. I already exported the video that I edited to the my computer, and now I need to, but I needed to add one more uh, thing in there that I forgot to add. Um, and essentially, one of the assumptions that Erica is making here is also, or she's ignoring the feedback mechanism that's actually in the flood. She's actually ignoring the feedback mechanism because there's actually a negative feedback system in when water is evaporating. So the water would have evaporated, it would have condensed into cumulus clouds that would eventually become rain clouds, and all that rain would have came back. It also would have removed the heat as it's doing that. So it would have removed a lot of the heat. This would have cooled the water down, and it would have replenished the water as a result. So it will actually has a negative feedback loop system that actually replenishes the missing water, and you wind up getting kind of a balancing effect from that. So there's no way that all of the oceans would have been boiled. That's just nonsense. It just wouldn't happen. then yeah, you can get to those numbers. It would boil the oceans, but you'd have to ignore those three things. You'd have to ignore, you'd have to ignore the water. You have to ignore the fact that you're making those two assumptions, and you have to ignore the fact that physics won't allow you to boil all the oceans. You might be able to shallow the oceans a little bit, evaporate some of the water, yeah. Uh, but you would not, it would not be able to boil the entire oceans, even if you deposit all that heat into the oceans. Um, Now that doesn't mean that if the Earth ever, goes into the sun or some extreme thing like that, or something goes supernova, that it wouldn't incinerate us, of course. But I'm just saying, as far as boiling the oceans and evaporation and what our atmosphere can actually contain, what it can hold at one given time. So that would not be physically possible anyhow. But but any given case, that's just not the case. That you have to, like I said, you have to have those two assumptions as well. You have to assume all that heat's depositing into the flow waters, which is not the case. Vardman, as I already mentioned in the previous video, was saying that if we had no way of getting rid of the heat, then yeah, things could happen. That's what he was saying. He wasn't saying that it did happen, obviously, because we're still here. You know, he wasn't saying accelerated nuclear decay didn't happen because he believes in accelerated nuclear decay. He was part of the rate project. He was just simply saying that if we do not have a mechanism, this would happen. But he's not arguing that it did happen. He's not arguing that there is no solution. He's not arguing that there is no mechanism. He's just saying if that was the case. In fact, he goes on. I actually took the liberty of actually reading further in the thing to see what he says, at least on the screenshot that Erica had put on her video. I looked at it, and Vardman actually specifically said that he raises up what Dr. Russell Humphreys did, and he talks about God superintending it. And I think that some critics think that every time God does an action, it's automatically a miracle. Not everything God does is a miracle. God can actually act through the laws of nature, for example. But not everything that God does is a miracle. An example I like to give is a situation where Jesus is on this boat with his disciples. I'm assuming it's some kind of fishing boat. A lot of his disciples were fishermen, and the storm's coming, and or the storm's there, and it's tossing the boat to and fro. It's waves flashing all over the place. Jesus is asleep. He's just taking a nap, right? But his disciples are freaking out. They're just going crazy. This storm, they're afraid they're going to die. They wake up Jesus and said, "Don't you care that we're going to perish here?" And he gets up and he calls out to the storm and he says, "Peace, be still." And immediately the waves calmed, the winds calmed, the storm died down. There's nothing miraculous about a storm dying down, but it did. And the disciples marveled at this person because he said that who is this man that the wind and the waves obey him. So yeah, that is a good example of how God can act through the natural world. It does not necessarily have to be miraculous. What Vardman said was that the rate team, a lot of them, think that God superimposed the solution. That does not necessarily entail a miracle. Now, some of them did think it was a miracle. Baumgartner does think it was a miracle. Um, but Russell Humphreys believed that he grounded his theory in relativity, which is what Barman then goes further and explains, because he actually talks further about what Dr. Russell Humphreys did in the Rate Project. And now Russell Humphreys don't hold to this model anymore. He changed his model in 2014. He changed it to a different model. Um, but this, in my opinion, a far more outlandish model. This one was an interesting model, but I don't think it ever really took on among a lot of YDCs because it was well, one thing, there's no evidence for it, no biblical or scientific evidence for it, and it turned out to be more um, almost sounding like a Christianized version of the inflationary model. But Russell Humphreys argued during the Ray Project maybe God expanded the universe out faster than it is currently, and according to a relativity, this would actually make the heat go away, all that extra heat go away, which he's right, it would, and it would be powerful enough to do it. I don't think any YC's actually held to that, and even Dr. Russell Humphreys has actually changed his mind since then to a different model. He's pivoted to a different model, but that was a model that he presented during the rate project. And I can see why that kind of thing got peer reviewed because it is factually correct. Relativity would make it go away if you could expand the universe during the flood. But there's no reason to think that God did that during the flood. So it didn't really catch on popularity. But Bartman does goes on to say that. So since Russell Humphreys grounded that in relativity, it wasn't a miracle. Um, God would have acted, increasing the size of the universe during that time, but relativity itself would made it go away. Now, I don't personally argue that. That's not my argument. I'm just saying that Vardaman himself might not have been actually arguing for a miracle per se, as much as he was arguing that God could have used the expansion of the universe and relativity and what because we now know to be relativity, to be able to make the heat go away. Now, I don't personally think he did that, nor would he need to do that. God could actually work a miracle without having to do that. But I'm just saying that these particular men was not actually arguing for a miracle per se. Um, because I know Russell Humphreys wasn't arguing for a miracle when he said that, and Vardaman deferred to Russell Humphreys' own model during that time of the Rage Project. So that tells me right off the bat that he was not referring to a miracle specifically, per se. It could be a miracle, but he doesn't necessarily was referring to a miracle. Now, Dr. Andrew Snelling was also on the rate project. His position is that he doesn't think there was ever really a heat problem. Heat sources, yes, during the flood, but he thinks that something must have got rid of that heat sources or dealt with it because otherwise there would be no fission tracks, there'd be no polonium halos. But the polonium halos itself and the fission tracks indicate accelerate radioactive decay. So because of that, because of that, um, he argues that cellular decay must have occurred, but there was no heat problem. That doesn't mean that he doesn't think there was heat sources. Obviously, radioactive decay would still give off heat, and accelerated decay would give off lots of heat. Only that something must have got rid of it. He's open to whether it be supernatural. He's open to whether it to be a naturalistic mechanism. He's open to both. So it's just a matter of which one it is. But uh, uh, for him, he thinks it doesn't matter because we know that it did occur because of the evidence, but we also know because of the evidence that there was no actual heat problem, and thus that. I don't think there was an actual heat problem. Most of my responses tend to be the rhetorical form of the heat problem, and that's usually what I end up dealing with. But anyway, yeah, as far as boiling the oceans go, I don't think you could boil the oceans physically, and it has to carry those particular assumptions. We do have the actual numbers of what it would take to bring the oceans to boiling, but that's not the same thing as boiling the entire oceans. To do that would require to ignore physics entirely in the process. And so I don't think Eric is willing to do that, but and I'm not willing to do that, and I don't think we need to do that. But personally, I don't think it ever went to that degree. I think that it did have rapid evaporation during the flood, but I don't think that it was to the point of boiling.
Okay, so accelerated nuclear decay alone makes Noah's Ark impossible, but
You hear the non sequitur there? That was a non sequitur. It does not follow logically. Accelerated decay does not make Noah's flood impossible. You could have that much, and it will, first off, it'd just be a matter of a mechanism to get rid of it. Secondly, you don't actually have to have any accelerated decay during Noah's flood in order to have a global flood. God could make a global flood happen, and there would be almost no heat sources during the flood. It doesn't require heat sources during the flood in order for the flood to happen. So this does not follow logically.
because you have to take all of the impact events, like the meteor that killed all of the dinosaurs, for
Obviously, we don't believe that there was a meteorite that killed the dinosaur, but we do believe there were meteorites during the flood. This is something that Mike Ord has talked about. I think Mike Ord actually argues for it being a trigger for the flood, even. Um, but we do have meteorites that happen during the flood year. I think most YCs would agree with that. I would agree with that. I do calculate that heat source into the overall heat budget during the flood.
from the past 500 million years, and those have to happen during the flood too, since the flood is responsible for that whole column. So let's add up the heat generated from the top 10, let's say, impact events of the past 500 million years. Using relatively conservative numbers, we get 4.47 times 10 raised 26 joules of energy, equivalent to another 99 billion hydrogen bombs.
All right. Let's look at Erica's number here. And so she says 4.47 times 10 raised 26 joules. Let's go to my numbers, my new numbers, and see what the calculation is for the meteorite impacts. All right, we're here. My numbers. Okay, it says meteor impacts 4.0 10 to 26 joules. So yeah, this is pretty close to what Erica's came up with. So at least when it comes to the meteor impacts, me and Erica agrees with the heat that was generated during the flood in terms of that. The numbers I got right now appears to agree with Erica's. So this is likely the amount of heat, or roughly. Hers is a little bit higher than mine, but for the most part, this is the roughly the amount of heat that was generated during the global flood. Um, and so yeah, but it but again, Erica's going to kind of assume that there was no mechanism to get rid of the heat that was being generated during the flood. So we'll see what she says on that. We've been dealing with the H-bomb thing. I think David Winsberg also put down a comment about how the amount of heat that's actually produced when you convert it to Celsius is actually not as much as it seems. So it's kind of a misleading argument. I also say it's a misleading argument because of the fact that you could actually calculate that for any year's worth of heat. If you do the heat budget alone, that's I can't remember the exact number, but it's quite a bit. It's probably in the thousands, I think, of H bombs. So this idea of just throwing up H bomb thing, it's not very helpful. It's misleading. It's not a very good argument.
So let's talk about limestone next, because there's tons worth of limestone on this planet, and we need an explanation for it because it's all during that past 500 million years worth of time.
Erica is fixing to talk about her arguments on limestone formation, or specifically on the amount of heat that's being produced by limestone. Now, keep in mind, she is about to assume uniformitarian assumptions regarding limestone formation, use that to calculate how much heat's produced, and then argue that against our position. So this is going to be a circular argument, but you guys listen up.
Limestone is probably calm, non-acidic waters to deposit.
I actually looked that up. That's not the actual case. I'm not really going to go into talking about limestone formation, but there are many different limestone that can be formed under catastrophic conditions and that sort of thing. So this it doesn't actually require calm, still water and that sort of thing. Um, but I'm not going to get into that because this video is not really about limestone formation, and that's misses the main point. The main point is she is going to push or assume her uniformitarian assumptions about limestone formation and argue it against the global, or at least arguing it in favor of the heat problem objection that's being leveled against our position. Which, of course, in our position, limestone doesn't form chemically, mostly, or I mean, it forms chemically, but it doesn't. Most of it is not being formed chemically during the flood. Some of it is, but most of it isn't. And so the amount of limestone formation or the amount of heat that's produced from limestone is not going to be that much during the flood. It's actually negligible, but we'll get into that.
Let's just allow them the deposition and charge them for the heat that it takes for limestone to actually form. Since calcite formation releases heat, to account for today's limestone numbers, we get another 5.6 times 10 raised 27 joules for approximately 1 trillion more hydrogen bombs.
Again, false. There's actually I did the calculations a long time ago when I first was trying to see how much limestone would actually do it. I might do it again eventually. I know that here more recently, Dr. Or David Winsberg actually did do the calculations on it and determined that not that much heat was generated from it, same as me. And this is because during the flood, most of the heat or most of the limestone would have formed organically. Because there's three ways for limestone to form: organically, mechanically, and chemically. Um, and so what the evolutionists assume, and Erica's assuming, Unitarians assume that limestone is forming, or that limestone would have formed mostly chemically during the flood, and Erica then assumes, well, Unitarian wouldn't assume that because they don't believe in global flood, but Erica's assuming on our position, and that if it forms chemically, then she's calculating how much heat that would be produced if it produces chemically. Now, here's the part that concerns me on a lot of the critics on my channel, because there's actually a critic that tries to debate me on how limestone is formed. I'm not very I'm surface level familiar with it, but I'm not super familiar with limestone formation. I'd prefer to have an expert on my channel to talk to first about that before I really dive into that subject matter. Um, but this particular critic don't care that I don't know that much. In fact, that just makes him want to pound on me even more on the subject matter. Um, but in doing so, he's going to miss the whole point of what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is I am not saying that that I'm right on limestone formation and you're wrong. I'm saying that I do believe I'm right and you're wrong. But here's what I'm really saying is that in order for Erica or any other critic who's challenging, taking the heat problem and using it as a challenge to global flood, for the sake of argument, you have to assume our position, even if you don't agree with it, even if you think it's dead wrong. You have to assume it for the sake of argument, or it's circular. Okay? It's circular reasoning. Now, so in our position, the heat is actually not, or there wouldn't be that much heat generated from limestone formation, because in our position, most of the limestone is forming organically. Some of it forms chemically, so there would be some heat, obviously. But when you calculate that heat, it's very negligible. Um, I did the calculations a long time ago. I don't really remember the numbers. This was like early on in my model when I was just looking at this and looking at Erica's video and on this and that sort of thing. And I did the numbers. It actually did come out negligible. It was not that much heat. More recently, David Winsberg also ran the numbers and also came up with the same conclusion, that there wouldn't be that much heat that would generate as a result of the limestone formation. There would be some, but it wouldn't be like a lot. It would be very negligible amount of heat. So this is very misleading, because she's just basically arguing her way into a circle. She's assuming that most of the heat is chemically being produced during the flood, and then trying to argue about the heat as a result leveled against our position. Of course, if she was leveling against our position, she has to assume our position for the sake of argument, in order to level the heat at us and say this is a problem for your position, or this is inconsistent with your position because it generates this much heat. Because in our position, the limestone wouldn't generate that much heat, would it? Because most of it's organic during the flood. That's the whole point. Okay. And we already discussed the fact that the hydrogen bomb thing, the H bomb thing, is very misleading.
Magma hardening too creates issues. In order to account for all of the hardened magma we have today, we can go ahead and add 5.4 times 10 raised 27 joules, or another approximately 1 trillion hydrogen bombs.
All right. before she gets in her final point, I just want to point out something on the magma hardening. It is true that magma hardening does produce heat, but here's the thing. That heat that is in the magma hardening, this is something I actually looked at a while back as well. It's actually part of volcanic heat. So if a person's assessment or flood model, when they are looking at the heat generated during the flood, includes volcanic heat or takes volcanic heat into consideration, considering the fact that all flood models and all flood advocates agree with volcanic eruptions during the flood. Doesn't matter whether they take the CPT, the hydroplate model, whatever they take, they agree that volcanic eruptions happen during the flood, 100%. So they all agree on that. And that's agreed universally across all flood advocates. And so if we were to include magma hardening would actually be part of the heat that's coming out of the volcanoes. So in reality, if you're counting volcanic heat, and then someone says, "Oh, well, you have to count for magma hardening," that actually is part of the volcanic heat, right? So you get what I'm saying. What she's doing here is pretty much elephant hurdling. She's trying to elephant hurdle a list, and she's using heat that's already being counted as part of the heat of volcanic eruptions. Which, by the way, is not really all that much when you actually factor in the total heat. The main heat source during the flood, the one that's going to produce the most overwhelming amount of heat, is going to be solar nuclear decay by a landslide. So if you were to graph this on a bar chart, you got accelerated nuclear decay all the way up here. You got CPT being the next heat source, and then all the other ones, including meteor impacts, including volcanic heat, all that's going to be much smaller. So, because accelerated decay is by far the most heat during the flood, and this is, I think even Erica agrees with this. That she don't agree with accelerated decay happening, but she agrees that based on a lot of models that are believed by YCs and they're accepted by YCs, and particularly the theory of accelerated decay, she agrees that during the flood, this would have been the most heat generated based on our position. Okay. If Erica's still manning our position, she would agree that this would be the number one in terms of the amount of heat. The CPT would be next, but it's about this small compared to that. So I mean, the accelerated decay by far is going to be the most heat. Um, and that's the most heat to deal with. When I first started to fashion my model together, that was one of the main things that I focused on because that was the biggest, dog in the room. you know, uh, uh, I heard someone say one time, if you ever went to prison, take out the biggest guy in the room, so that way nobody will mess with you at that point. So you'll either die and don't have to worry about the rest of the prison, or you take out the biggest guy in the room. Well, I was setting up trying to take out the biggest guy in the room, which was accelerated nuclear decay, and that's why I started out with my heat problem before I moved into other heat sources as well, in dealing with those. But accelerated nuclear decay is the biggest dog in the room, clearly. Um, and the other heat sources are very small in comparison. Um, the CPT is a little higher than the others, though, as far as the friction produced by runaway subduction. Um, but as far as magma hardening, it's just Erica trying to elevate her a little this because it's already included as part of the volcanic heat. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to include that as a separate heat source, unless of course, you're trying to elephant hurdle this list at us.
And finally, Baumgartner himself estimates the heat release just for subducting all the plates and moving them along the surface of the mantle from a supercontinent position to now. And the number he gives is 10 raised 28 joules. This is equivalent to approximately another 2 trillion hydrogen bombs.
I don't agree with them. The hydrogen bombs, her hydrogen bomb suggestion because it's a misleading argument. But I do agree with her number on Baumgartner's 10 to the 28th power joules worth of heat. That is true. That is the number that Baumgartner had estimated for runaway subduction. because runaway subduction creates friction, and of course friction creates heat, and so that would generate a lot of heat. Now it's nowhere near the amount of accelerating decay, as already pointed out, but it does generate heat. But we now know that this heat would have advected into the upper mantle, because when you heat the mantle up like that, at that much, you excel it beyond the Rayleigh number, the Rayleigh critical. RIC on if you look in this an equation, it'll be under RIC Rayleigh critical, and this actually triggers high speed advection in the crust, which moves the crust, heated crustal material, really fast as convection is going, into the upper mantle. And this would have actually got rid of the heat fast enough before any of these catastrophic problems happen, before the crust melts, etc. So no, Dan or whoever else wants to say that. No, the crust does not become plasma. Okay, the heated rock moves fast enough into the upper mantle that it before it has a chance to really spread and include the entire crust and melt the crust. As a result, the heated rock is actually advected into the upper mantle really fast. That would only that is true that it does generate that much heat. It would be true that it would melt the crust if allowed to linger for any amount of time, like days, weeks, etc. The amount of time it would melt the crust, but hours, seconds, minutes, it's speeding it up into the crust. No, it's actually managed to do it really fast, and too fast for it to have that kind of a problem. Okay, so it actually moves the heat fast enough as a result. So we now know that that's not the case. Baumgartner was assuming in the rate of conduction. Of course, that's why he assumes it's a miracle, because conduction is really slow. I think rock's probably was it? He said a poor insulator, something like that. I can't remember, but essentially it will uh, the rocks would heat up really fast if left there for too long. And so the object of it is to get the heat out fast enough, but conduction can't get the heat out fast enough. It moves at a snail's pace. Conduction is basically a type of diffusion through the molecules of a substance. I'm not going to say a solid, because I think it can do it through like liquid. For example, the mantle to the core on the CMB, the core mantle boundary, conducts heat that way, or from the core to the mantle, conducts heat that way. Conduction happens there into as well. And so you can conduct into a liquid, but it usually happens in a solid, and that's what most people usually end up talking about. But basically, it's just a type of diffusion, and it's really slow. It's slow. The amount of heat that Baumgartner's talking about here, it would take millions of years through conduction. My model actually bypasses the need for conduction. Now, it doesn't make conduction irrelevant. Conduction is still happening, obviously. Um, but it does take all that really extreme heat that's being generated, the heated, or more specifically, the heated rock, and moves it really fast into the upper mantle. And that's what my model shows that would have happened during the flood, due to accelerating decay and speeding up and that sort of thing. And this would also include the heated rock that's heating up as a result of radioactive isotopes as well, accelerating. And this also would have moved really fast into the upper mantle. So my model actually shows that this would not have been a problem during the global flood. I can't wait to peer review my model eventually and get it into mainstream.
This is equivalent to approximately another 2 trillion hydrogen bombs, and it's probably an underestimate too, since we know there have been 7 supercontinents, not 1 or 2.
All right, 7 supercontinents. I when I first saw this video, this was the first I've heard of it. So 7 supercontinents. This assumes her position as well. Now, our position is that we do agree that all the continents were together at one point as supercontinent. Now there are some YCs that are against that, but most YCs agree with it now. It was originally suggested by a YC. There was an actual YC who originally suggested that all the continents were together. He got ignored. Uniformitarian later suggested it, and everybody just kind of, oh, that's a neat idea. And we suggested it first. But anyway, and the person suggested, the one who originally suggested it first, said that, I can't remember his name, but you could probably look him up. If during the global flood, these continents would have separated, and the CPT claims the same thing. So it would have separated from the supercontinent. There's one supercontinent. We have evidence that the whole world used to be a supercontinent. That's easy because of the shape of the Earth and everything fits together like a jigsaw puzzle and that sort of thing. So we know plate tectonics moves everything apart. So we have evidence everything was in one. But trying to prove more than one is much harder because you have to speculate about the past. I did a little bit more research on those alleged seven continents that had separated. That was claimed by Erica. Uh, the evidence for that is extremely weak, like very, very weak. It's often based on speculation, incomplete data. Some things are fragmentary, so it's extremely weak. And there's varying opinions, even among uniformitarian geologists. There's varying opinions of how many there is and whether all seven is taken and there's varying degrees of confidence levels as well. Even if they take a certain particular model, it's very model dependent, very interpretive. There's highly speculative, and some of the evidence that is there that they do have can be interpreted within a YC framework, such as the CPT model and that sort of thing. So it's extremely weak. It's so weak that honestly, I think that Erica would probably have a better time of convincing me that Lucy was a completely bipedal ape and Prometheus could do the tango. I mean, they would have that kind. It's the evidence that's claimed for that is extremely weak. And of course, the YC position, and I did check on this as well, the YC position is just that one continent exists, not seven. And so she would have to attack the position that YCs have because she's leveling the heat problem as a problem for the global flood, which is a YC position. So she would have to sit there and try to argue that on the one continent and using Baumgartner's numbers because that's represents our position. She's trying to smuggle in uniformitarian positions and trying to smuggle it into our position in order to attack us, in order to add more heat to it, in which case is not even our position to begin with. So it winds up being circular reasoning, circular argument. But the evidence for that is extremely weak. It's so weak that honestly I think that Erica would have a better time of convincing me there was a bunch of bipedal apes walking around, you know, the Australopithecines were bipedal. I mean, you would have a better chance of convincing me of that than that, because that's how weak the evidence is. It's extremely weak. So, yeah, but anyway, I just thought I'd add that in there because I did do a little bit more research since I made that video. I don't see any evidence for it, but here's the real kicker here. She's assuming uniformitarian assumptions and positions. Since she believes that there was seven continents originally, and since other uniformitarians are now accepting the possibility that there were seven supercontinents, which I'm not sure how that works out because there's seven continents total now, but she's saying that there was seven because she and other humanitarians saying that there were seven continents. Therefore, now we have a problem on our position, which don't claim seven continents. So, So yeah, there's no evidence for 7 continents. She has to assume her position. She has to assume her uniformitarian position. She does this a lot in the video. She just kind of assumes her uniformitarian position, and then attacks us on the basis of that.
Okay, so setting aside all of the other geologic issues intrinsic to flood models, as well as the radiation problem, and considering only a handful of variables that produce heat here, we end up with a whopping total of 2 times 10 raised 29 joules for the heat released during catastrophic plate tectonics. This is equivalent to 4.78 times 10 raised 13 hydrogen bombs for 93,707 bombs per square kilometer, or 48 bombs per cubed kilometer.
Again, I think she's assuming the 7 continent bomb thing, which of course is not our position. So this is circular. This is also kind of reckless. Square kilometers. I actually put this in the comment section. Wish I had drew this up on this. I can show this on the screen. Because you could actually do that with last year's heat budget. Show how many H bombs that would represent, and then how much square inches based on the radius of explosion, that would represent. It was. This is a very misleading argument, extremely misleading, and I actually demonstrated that in the comment section of the last video I did, responding to this video of Erica's. And uh, on top of that, like I said, this is actually an artificial heat source because it has to assume 7 continents splitting, and then try to calculate that instead of dealing with the one continent that all YCs are agreeing to, that we have evidence for, etc. So I think this is just Erica's way of elephant hurdling these heat sources at us. She does this a lot in the video. She tries to add as much heat as possible. Other videos I've seen her do on the heat problem, she's done the same thing, where she's trying to elephant hurdle heat problems. She's trying to make the problem worse than what she thinks it is, and she keeps on doing that every time she makes a heat problem video. But in reality, the situation is not quite like that. And if you are attacking our position and saying the heat sources that we're saying generated during floods a problem for our position, then you have to assume our position for the sake of argument. If you don't, you are arguing in a circle.
Understandably, Baumgartner has tacitly admitted that his model of CPT does not work without miracles.
Actually, he does claim naturalistic mechanisms for all of his claim. He doesn't claim there was a miracle to move the subduction place that fast. What she's actually talking about is getting rid of all that heat. He does claim that there was a miracle, that God worked a miracle to get rid of all that heat. That's what he's arguing. He's not actually arguing that the trigger mechanism to move the place that fast was a miracle. He doesn't argue that the plates moving that fast is a miracle. I've heard some people say that they thought it was physically impossible for the plates to move that fast. That's false. It can move that fast under certain conditions, and obviously, we're going to assume, as Baumgartner is, catastrophic conditions are in the work. What Baumgartner's actually admitted to was that not that his model did not work without a miracle, but that that he doesn't think the heat could go away without a miracle, which is really just a consequence of the plates moving that fast. And so he's saying, okay, the plates moving that fast, there's lots of heat generated as a result of that. I don't think it could have gone away any other way except God doing it. That's essentially what he's saying. He's not saying that that the only way the plates could move that fast, or that runaway subduction could happen, or that this could be triggered this way, is if it's a miracle. In fact, he actually has naturalistic mechanisms for all of that. So he's not arguing that. Now, of course, even if one did argue for a miracle, that would not make someone's model false. Because science is actually predicated on the Christian biblical worldview. All the earlier scientists were Christians. The scientific method was founded by a Christian. So science only works on the Christian biblical worldview. Uniformity in nature, not uniformitarianism, uniformity of nature. Um, the fact that there are predictable patterns in nature that we can predict, and it makes science possible. All that makes science possible. The fact that there's objective laws in physics that actually make the universe work a certain way, and that sort of thing. The laws of logic that we use to assess all that, the fact that we could trust our thoughts about those matters and to raise objective conclusions about them, and that sort of thing. Um, that's objective to reality. All that's going to depend on the fact that the biblical Christian worldview is true. Because if the biblical Christian worldview is true, science itself would not be possible. And the biblical Christian worldview allows for the possibility of miracles. Now, what some people do is they assume what's called metaphysical naturalism. Metaphysical naturalism is the view that all things, even if you have strong evidence that it's a miracle, you have to assume that God's not involved and that there's naturalistic explanation for it. This permeates, unfortunately, the scientific community. A lot of people in the scientific community tries to do that, and there's even some Christians that do that, and that seems to omit God from the equation and that sort of thing. And there's even secular historians that have done that. And Bart Ehrman has tried to talk about that, and he believes that God should not be included in history. But the reality is, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If God acted in history, or acted in the natural world, or created all things, does it not make sense that God would create the laws of nature? He created the way the universe is. He created. He wrote. He acted in history through his activities in history, miracles, the incarnation, the resurrection of Jesus. Does it not make sense that for God to be included in all that? To exclude God makes zero sense whatsoever. Science itself would not be impossible. So I have no problem with the idea that Baumgartner is still doing science while doing a miracle, to talk about a miracle. Now, so if he did say a miracle with his model, that wouldn't be problematic. It's not actually true. What Baumgartner said with the miracle is that God would have needed to be involved to get rid of the heat. That's what he's arguing for a miracle. He's not arguing for a miracle versus model. He could have, but he didn't. Okay, he didn't need to because you can actually move the place that fast under catastrophic conditions. So he didn't need to argue for a miracle there. But there's nothing wrong with arguing miracle. Now, I don't believe in using miracle as a cop out, like you don't know what the answer is, so you toss in a miracle. I believe in actually looking at it, investigating it, researching it. And so I'm not going to just default in assuming it's a miracle just because I can't figure out any other way around it. I'm not like that. I'm not saying Baumgartner is. I'm just saying I'm not like that personally. But I don't think that Baumgartner is actually saying that his model itself is based on a miracle. What he's saying is that to get rid of the heat, that the heat is a consequence of runaway subduction. Okay, and he's saying to get rid of that heat, it would require a miracle. That's what he's saying, and that's only because he cannot figure out any other way around it. He has personally said this. Mike Ward, who also takes a miracle position on getting rid of the heat, also said this, that they can't figure out any way around it. That's the reason why they argue for a heat, for the miracle in the first place, because they can't see any physical reason how they get rid of the heat. Now, of course, nobody's actually thought about my eviction idea, so I was the first to actually figure out a way around that, and so that would have gotten the heat out fast enough, the heated crustal material out fast enough before it becomes a problem for the crust. So it worked out really well. But anyway, as far as what Baumgartner said, he's not arguing for a miracle per se for his model. Rather, he's arguing that the consequence of his model is producing a lot of heat, and he does argue for a miracle there.
And the big YEC orgs that promote it, like Answers in Genesis, CMI, and ICR, admit that it is a currently unsolved issue and it may indeed be unsolvable without God's intervention.
Is this the case? Is this an unsolvable situation without God's intervention? Erica is. We're going to get into what the actual position of the rate team was and the position of different organizations what they're actually arguing for. She kind of took them out of context, and she's also making a categorical error there as well. But what the rate team actually said that they did not. This was their words. They said that they did not think that it was a irreconcilable problem. They thought it was an issue, perhaps even an actual problem that needed to be looked at or researched at a later time. But they said that they did not consider it to be unresolvable or no insurmountable. That was the word they used. They did not see the problem as being insurmountable. That it can be actually overcome. Um, as far as God's intervention, there are varying degrees, but usually they were willing to accept the possibility that God intervened. Here's where Erica makes the categorical error. As said earlier, the just because God's intervening don't mean it's a miracle. There's a difference between God acting and God acting miraculously. It's not exactly the same thing. Um, God acted and He made the storm calm down. And there's nothing miraculous about storms calming down and wind stopping and stuff that happens all the time. So that was not a miracle. So, so God can act without it being miraculous. Um, uh, and now there's nothing wrong with it if God did do a miracle. Of course not. Of course, in Erica's mind, she thinks that you can't do science if you're invoking a miracle, but that's not true. That's metaphysical naturalism. But there's nothing wrong with it if you did. But however, just because God acting does not necessarily mean that it's a miracle. Now, some of them do argue that they don't see any other way out, that they think it's a miracle, like Dr. John Baumgartner does. Um, but the rate project was inconclusive. They did not know for sure what the actual issue was. But Russell Humphreys did come up with a model that was based or grounded in relativity. So they did think that you could resolve the issue. It's just a matter of what mechanism was present and whether that mechanism was naturalistic or not. With the different organizations like CMI, Answers in Genesis, what they're conceding to is the fact that we may not know a mechanism, and they may not mean one, but that does not really overcome the evidence, regardless whether we know what the mechanism is or not. Okay, that does not mean that we don't have that evidence. And of course, the rate team did not conclude that it had to be one of those two. By the way, um, now, they did say that they appealed to the possibility that future discoveries in this matter could resolve it, possibly. But that's typical science. It's not unscientific to look to the future to determine what that is. Now, of course, we can only deal with the evidence that's presented us, but that does not necessarily mean that we cannot be open to that possibility because that's how science is supposed to be done. It's provisional. We're open to updates. We're open to revision. We're open to discoveries, etc., 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 etc. Um, the idea that the only two options that are available is either you appeal to a miracle or appeal to exotic physics is a what's called a false dichotomy. Now, it is true that you can be optionally restricted, and it would not be a false dichotomy, but this is not optionally restricted. It's just simply a matter. First of all, the whether you know what the mechanism is or not does not take away the overwhelming evidence that a global flood occurred, that accelerated nuclear decay occurred. None of that stuff is taken away just because if someone does not know how the heat was handled. Okay. Um, Second of all, we have reasons to believe that not only the accelerated nuclear decay occurred, but the heat did not that the heat did not destroy polonium halos and fission tracks, even though polonium halos would have been created as mistakes as a result of uranium decay. And so we know the accelerated nuclear decay had occurred. We know the accelerated nuclear decay occurred, but but it couldn't have produced heat because we know that these are things like polonium radio halos and fission tracks are destroyed by high heat. So something would have had to take away that heat, regardless what it is, whether it's God, miracle, or some naturalistic explanation. Now, in addition to that, people have come up with naturalistic explanations to explain it. My particular model gets rid of the heat, gets rid of all the heat, including accelerated nuclear decay, and in really fast from those issues, the problem areas. Gets rid of the heated rock in the mantle, advects into the upper mantle as a result. So I actually deal with the heat from all the heat sources that flood advocates agree happened during the global flood. So, and that was a naturalistic explanation. And all you have to do to get out of that a false dichotomy, right, is to offer a third option. I can offer a third option. Russell Humphreys offered a third option because he didn't offer that either you appeal to miracle or appeal to exotic physics, because he appealed to relativity, right? Um, Now, he did believe that God expanded the universe out during the flood, but again, this wouldn't have been a miracle unless, of course, the critics want to believe the inflationary model that they believe in is also a miracle, because it also expands out the universe a lot faster. In fact, it does it a lot more than what Russell Humphreys was suggesting, because there's like going way faster than the speed of light on both of the speeds. On the normal speed and the fast speed are both going way faster than the speed of light. So theirs would be more closer to a miracle than ours would be if someone took the inflationary model. Now, I don't personally take the idea Russell Humphrey's position. I personally don't take the Russell Humphrey's position on that. I don't think Russell Humphrey's take that position anymore. He changed his model in 2014 to something different, so he no longer takes that position either. I don't think anyone really ever caught on. It was an interesting idea, and I like that position better than his new model, but um, it's not something I think that actually happened or during the flood. But the point is that all you have to do is get out of the false dichotomy is prove that there are other options, and there are. And so it's not just one or the other. As far as it being unsolvable, that is false. Dr. Andrew Snelling, who works for Answers in Genesis, has told me in email that he is open to a naturalistic explanation. He's open to a miraculous one too, but he's also open to a naturalistic explanation. He says it could be a naturalistic explanation. His position is simple, that he doesn't think that there was ever really a heat problem, because not that there wasn't heat sources during the flood, but there was not a heat problem because we have evidence that accelerated decay occurred, but we also have evidence that something must have got rid of the heat, because it would have destroyed the polonium halos and fission tracks, which we still have today that we can look at and examine. Um, so we know that there couldn't have been high heat that would have been able to do that. So something would have gotten rid of the heat really fast, regardless what something is. And that's essentially what Andrew Snelling's position is on it. And I agree with Andrew Snelling on it. And I don't think that there was ever really truly a heat problem. Now we're just basically dealing with the rhetorical form of that argument that's being leveled at the flood, and that's what we're essentially dealing with. But I don't think there was truly ever a heat problem. There were heat sources during the flood, yes, but it didn't actually. But the heat was gotten rid of, and I believe that there are naturalistic explanations to even explain it. Now I don't have a problem with someone who utilizes a miracle, but I don't think there's any biblical reason to support that a miracle occurred during this time for that, and I don't think, and going to default to looking at a naturalistic explanation, which we do have naturalistic explanations that do explain it. So it's not unsolvable. Um, and the funny thing is, a lot of the stuff that she looks at on that is comments that were made a long time ago. And the rate team, by the way, wasn't just in the late 90s. They were late 90s to early 2000s, by the way. The Break project ended around 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. And so, but anyway, so the heat problem is not an unsolvable issue. Now it could be unsolvable without God's intervention if there was not other naturalistic explanations possible, but as it were, there is. So it's not unsolved. It's never been an unsolvable issue per se. Because even with God's intervention, that would not be an unsolvable issue, unless you want to limit what God can do and not do. But in any given case, it's not an unsolvable position. The rate team saw it as not being an insurmountable problem. They said that it was not insurmountable. That was their words. And they did not see it as a being that to the point where it could not be solved. They believed that it could be solved.
This, I think, is an understatement. There's no way to do it with physics as we know it right now. You have to break it at the quantum level to make this work.
Did she just say break at the quantum level? All right. First of all, that's actually not true. Heat problem solution would not break at the quantum level. What I think she's doing is I think she's making a categorical error. She's conflating the heat problem solution with her argument for accelerated nuclear decay. That's not required. Okay. For the sake of argument, she has to assume our position. For the sake of argument, she can't just simply assume her position, and she's assuming her position right now. She's assuming the accelerated nuclear decay doesn't happen. But this is not the case. And by the way, they didn't break quantum physics whenever they sit there and accelerate nuclear decay in laboratory experiments. They didn't do that. You don't have to break it at the quantum level. Um, uh, you can actually strip electrons, which would actually accelerate nuclear decay. You could also extreme heat and pressure has been known to do it. Extreme cold as well. So we know that outside conditions can impact decay rates. Um, and sometimes people point to the what they call the big four, which some people then try to argue that nothing could accelerate these no matter what we throw them. Well, first of all, we haven't really thrown everything we can at them. They've only been tested with partial ionization. They haven't been tested with full ionization. They've only been tested with 100 GPa and that sort of thing. So they've been tested with some of the things, but they haven't really been tested up. Um, Heat, I can't remember exactly. Might be 2000. I can't remember. They were tested with something, some kind of heat, but they haven't been throwing everything at them for one thing. But the Wraith project actually looked into that. But here's a clear argument that knows that these four elements must have accelerated during the flood. Um, the fact that out of these four, three of them are part of the uranium decay chain, uranium-238, uranium-235, and thorium-232, part of the uranium decay chain, which has uranium-238 decaying all the way down from this long decay chain called the uranium decay chain, all the way down to lead-206 and that sort of thing. And well, it just so happens that we have the polonium radio halos, which polonium is on that as well, and fission tracks. And these show that the evidence is that accelerated nuclear decay had occurred in the past. These are evidence of that acceleration. As I understand it, it would seem to suggest that a group of polonium was together. Uranium or a group of uranium halos were together at the same time when they accelerated, and they caused these Martian fission tracks directly are caused by uranium decay as well. And so these are either directly or indirectly. I think maybe polonium radiation handles more indirectly, but the fission tracks are directly as a result of uranium decay. And this is evidence that it must have occurred. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. They annul at very high heats. So if there was an actual heat problem, if there was actually amount of heat that generated and wiped and nothing got rid of that heat and it just building up uncontrollably, then they would have destroyed palladium radio halos and fission tracks because they annul at very high temperatures. But that didn't happen. We have that evidence, so we know that that didn't happen. So something got rid of the heat. So we know these accelerated, but something must have got rid of the heat. Also, uranium-238 is also was used on the granite that the helium was intrinsic to from the helium retention inside zircon crystals. And if billions of years really did pass with the uranium-238, then there should be no helium or virtually no helium in the zircon crystals. Or the surrounding biotite material, the surrounding rock that was around the zircons also had helium in it, and there should be no, hardly none in there either. They should have all escaped out of the rock as well. Helium is a very slippery molecule and should have, slipped out pretty easy. Because it tends to slip out really, really fast to rocks and crevices or cracks and crevices, especially when it's heated up. Heating makes it slip out even faster. So there should be no helium left in the zircon crystals, but there's an abundance of helium. And when it was tested and prediction was made by Dr. Russell Humphreys, and it was discovered that about 6,000 years worth of helium was inside the zircon crystals. What does that mean? Well, it means that the zircon crystals are not billions of years old. Neither is the surrounding rock, even though it was tested with uranium-238. Uranium-238 had to have accelerated in the past as a result. This is something I'm going to be looking more into because I have a theory out on accelerated nuclear decay called the rifle theory, RIFL. It's an acronym. It stands for radioisotopic feedback loop. It invokes a positive feedback loop that the right conditions that needed to affect the accelerated decay triggered accelerated decay naturally, and these conditions caused nuclear decay to accelerate during the flood, and it tapered off toward the end of the flood when the trigger that triggered it, which right now I have volcanism as its trigger. As ionization happened, a high level of ionization happened, and a lot of atoms, the atoms of beta decayers had been stripped and of electrons, and it's triggered a high-speed acceleration in nuclear decay, causing other factors also, like lots of heat, lots of pressure, and all of this was feeding into a system that fed back into itself in a positive feedback loop, so it kept on increasing itself exponentially during the flood year until the trigger that gave it life died down, which would have followed the closing of the fountains of the Great Deep, and it would have tapered off by the end of the year. That's called the rifle theory. I have that in my Death of the Heat Problem video. I plan on doing more work on that. I know been focused more on my GTF model, but I do plan on doing more work on that later on down the road. But the point is that Erica has to assume accelerated nuclear, even though she doesn't agree with it. She has to assume it for the sake of argument, or she's arguing in a circle. So essentially, her argument is the accelerated nuclear decay has a heat problem with it. That heat would have served as a problem for the global flood, but the accelerated decay didn't happen anyhow. So therefore, now you have a heat problem. So it's like, okay, you can't have it both ways. She's essentially arguing in a circle, is what she's doing. She has to assume, even if she doesn't agree with accelerated decay, she has to assume it for the sake of argument. My own model assumes accelerated nuclear decay, uses the heat from accelerated decay, shows that the heat itself would have been its own solution. So if she's insinuating that the laws of physics would not allow for to get rid of that heat, that is completely false. The laws of physics do. In fact, my model actually follows the laws of physics to the letter. It uses what we know. This is one of the things I like about the model because we know what would happen if you heat the mantle up. We know what would happen to the heat in the crust. We know what would happen to once you heat the mantle up, what some of that heat's going to do is going to go through a volcanic eruption, and some of that's going to go into the water, some of it's going to go in the atmosphere. We know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen when the heat in the atmosphere because we have Stephen-Boltzmann's law. We know what's going to happen with the heat in the floodwaters. This is all based on known laws of physics. It's not based on physics that haven't been discovered yet. It's not based on uh, uh, miracle. It did not invoke any action from God. It's just saying that the conditions of the flood, the catastrophic conditions of the flood, invoked a situation which allowed for the very heat that was generated during the flood to be spread out for start with, so it's not concentrated in one area, removed from problem areas fast enough and be able to mitigate this heat, regulate it, distribute it, store it, get rid of it all in a system, a positive feedback system that's feeding back into itself, and that also incorporates cooling mechanisms like latent heat removal, volcanic cooling, like cloud, increased cloud cover, and things like that. It includes cooling mechanisms in it to help cool off the planet as it's dealing with this heat. And so the heat itself, the system is thermally driven. So we know what would happen in those cases. None of the things that I argued in my model at all invokes a miracle. Nothing. It doesn't invoke a miracle. It doesn't invoke action. God, I'm not against those things. I just don't think they're biblically sound, and there's no way to support them biblically. So I don't try to result in that. Plus, it could end up sounding like a rescue device to sit there and always sit there assume it's a miracle if you can't figure out any other way around it. And so we default back to looking at naturalistic explanations, and I do think there is a naturalistic explanation to explain it. And one thing I like about my model is that we know in that scenario, we know what would happen. We know what would happen to the heat. We know what would happen to the condition of the mantle. We know what would happen when some of that heat goes to the surface. We know what would happen in these situations because we have the physics, and we know that. And so I love my model because I can work off of what we know without invoking what we don't know and without invoking any kind of action from God or miracle. There's nothing wrong with that if that was the case, and if there was biblical evidence for that to be the case. But there is no biblical evidence for that to be the case, and so I'm not going to default to that and try to use a miracle as a rescue device. Rather, instead, I'm arguing simply that we have the physics, and we know exactly in that scenario what would happen as a result. And that's the beauty of it. And that did not require me to break physics. It did not require me to break quantum physics. It did not require me to uh, uh, invoke a miracle or any actions from God, even non-miraculous actions from God. It didn't require me to do any of that. Now, I have no problem against it if that was what occurred, but it didn't require me. So that false dichotomy is false, and it didn't. I did not have to break any laws of physics to do what I did. So we know that it can be done. We know it.
And I really think that the heat problem is not utilized enough by people who argue against young Earth creationism. This is a full stop preclusion, right? You have a choice here if you're a young Earth creationist. You can either appeal to a miracle or you can break physics. Those are the only two options, and I wish that this was put forward more.
There's the false dichotomy right there. You either have to appeal to a miracle or appeal to exotic physics. That's false. The rate team actually didn't appeal to exotic physics. Depends on how, I guess, how you define exotic. They did appeal to future possible research as being something that yielded that maybe more research need to be done on that. But that's typical science. Scientists do that. Scientists say, oh, well, maybe future research can yield more on this. Maybe this needs to be explored more, or something like that. That's not unnatural to do that in scientific research and studies that have been done. Um, but as far as it either has to be exotic physics, or that, or miracle that's a false dichotomy. You don't have to break physics. I already mentioned that. My model does not have to break physics to make that possible. You just have to. Now, she might be assuming uniformitarian assumptions with the present, but uniformitarianism is not a law in physics. There's no law that says that everything has to happen at a certain rate under the same conditions as it is in the present. There's nothing that says that. You can actually have it happening in different rates depending on the conditions that it is exposed to. So there's no reason to arbitrarily assume that. But in any given case, that's all the video I'm going to be discussing now. So let's go into the closing here, because I'm not going to be doing any more of this uh, video in this series. This will be the last one. Well, okay, that brings us to the end of this video series. Um, I been wanting to sit there and go ahead and I'm trying to end up my smaller stuff because I actually have a new series coming. I'm going to show you the promo to that here in a minute. But I have a new series coming that's going to be coming out soon. I can't wait for it. I am looking forward to it. It's going to come in the month of April. I've set it out that long so that way it gives me time to get rid of the other. I've got 2 more episodes to do of the Tompkins Controversy Revisit. I did have 3, but I shortened it down to 4 episodes total instead of 5 in order because I really need to go ahead and get rid of it because the paper came out early last year and we all moved on. Originally, I was wanting to do a video responding to one of Erica's videos that she had done on that, but I'm already responding to Erica quite a bit on a lot of other things, including the new series that's come out. There's also going to be partly a video response to her Will Delphi series as well, and in part, it's going to probably have slide presentations. I might include a few interviews in there. I don't know, but it's going to be a pretty big series. So, but I'm trying to get rid of all my little stuff because this would mean that I would have 3 big series out currently ongoing, and I think that's probably a lot for me. So I am going to kind of push that out to April sometime. I also have another video that I'm trying to do on the geothermal feedback model. I need to try to get focused back on that again. I also I have an after show that I'm going to be doing following a debate between Erica from Gutsick Gibbon and Dr. Peter Line, which I've had on several times. Both of them are going to be debating on Standing for Truth on Donnie Budinsky's channel. And right after that debate is over with, we're going to be doing an after show where we're going to be me and Dr. Peter Line, that is, where we're going to be discussing the debate and the direction of the debate went and his personal impressions on it, and maybe even get some responses to some of the things that she said or brought up, and see what he thinks. But so I've got a lot on my plate, so I'm trying to get rid of some of these smaller stuff so I have a little bit more room freed up as far as what I've committed myself to. Um, and I also plan on doing more episodes of my Supernatural series as well as this year. I plan on getting some more episodes out of that as well. But let me show you my promo video, and you can tell me what you think in the comment section of it. I like that. Um, Tell me what you think of that new series that's coming up called The Fall of Darwinism. I can't wait for it. Like I said, in part, it's going to be a video response series to Erica's Will Delpy series, but I may also include other response video type deal in there as well. It's going to have slide presentations. It might have some interviews, I don't know, but I want to mostly do it with me doing it because this is something that I really wanted to do and include in there. I'm going to be defining molecules of man evolution, and while we always use that phrase, what the actual issue is with evolution, Darwinian evolution, things like that, the nature of science, the nature of evidence. It's going to be all in there. Originally, it was supposed to be two different series I was going to have, and I didn't want to commit to that and put it on place because they're going to be overlap, dealing with a lot of different similar issues. So I said, well, why don't I just make it the same series? Um, and I was going to do one called one of the series was going to be called Erica's Egregious Errors, which I was going to do previously on her response to Laugh Feast video, the 6 hour video she made there, and do a series on that. But I decided not to. I pivoted away from it eventually. Got tied up on other things. Had some legal stuff happen with YouTube. Had to deal with that. Once I won that, I was already on doing other projects by that time because it was like 3 months later. And so it got put on hiatus status, and then just kind of got ignored for the longest time, and then finally I decided to do that, but I wanted to do it as a response video to the Will Duffy series that she did. But I decided, why not do my own thing where I'm actually teaching people? I can be able to teach people on what YAC positions are. I can focus on why Darwinism fails, or evolutionism, whatever you want to call it. Of course, Darwinism has been flying that crashing plane for a long time. They were heading to being burning and crashing for a very long time. My series just shows it burning and after it burns and crashes to the ground, and the fall of that, the fall of Darwinism. And so we're seeing that in our day and age, and I think it's great. I think it's awesome. I love seeing Darwinists come up with more rescue devices to try to account for their position. So that's awesome. This series is going to be great, but I scheduled it out to April to give me enough time to get rid of some of the videos that's going to be tying up my time a little bit, and I'm trying to get rid of those out. And I'm also might be starting school soon as well, so that might slow down some of my videos for a little bit. So you guys just kind of pray for me and stay with me, and we'll get to more stuff. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Can't forget that. Subscribe to my channel. Uh, Always give the video a thumbs up because that does actually help the YouTube algorithm, gets this information out to more people. Make sure that you drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. I know some of the critics are probably going to respond to this. They usually do. And then I'll have to respond to them, and we'll go back and forth for a little bit. Um, but um, uh, but I do want to make sure that if you're new to this channel, I do things on biblical creationism, young Earth creationism. Sometimes I deal with pseudoscience, such as evolution, because evolution is pseudoscience. Sometimes I deal with that. Sometimes I deal with other apologetics. I do all kinds of general apologetics on this channel. Sometimes I do resurrection. I have a video out a short time ago, I think, with Dr. Gary Habermas, where I did a video with him on the resurrection. That was awesome. And I plan on doing more stuff on the resurrection eventually as well. I've got me and Eli Ayala from Revealed Apologetics has been talking about doing a response video to a in-person debate he had with Dan Barker, the atheist Dan Barker, and I guess it was at some kind of conference that he was invited to. But he had a debate with him on the subject matter of the existence of God, of the Bible, the God of the Bible. And so we're going to be doing a response video or to that debate on with with going to, responding to Dan Barker, and I've invited Eli Yala, who's agreed to come on my channel. Right now, we're trying to set up an exact date and time for it, but it's going to be soon. It's going to be sometime soon. He's already agreed to do it. It's just a matter of coming up with the exact time and dates and fit it with both of our schedules and to make it work. So once we do that, we should be able to bring that in and that's going and I'm going to enjoy that too because I try to incorporate. I'm a presuppositional apologist, so I try to incorporate presuppositional apologetics as much as possible, and I don't do as much videos on existence God as some people do, but I do believe strongly that there's good reasons to hold to the existence of God, and so we're going to talk about that as well in that video. So join me for that when we do have that, and and join me for the Tom Controversy Revisited series, which I'm also going to be trying to finish off as soon as possible, and so that we can kind of move on from that point. Of course, don't forget the after show that follows Peter Line and Erica's debate on Standing for Truth. Make sure you set your notifications for that. By the way, my after show of that will be open mic. So not only will it be live, but it'll be open mic, so you guys can actually come into the video and talk to me and Dr. Peter Line as well. So that'll be the first time I've ever had anything open mic on my channel. It'll be the be the first time I ever do an after show as well, because I've never done an after show before. So it's gonna be kind of cool. And we'll see what it goes from there. If the open mic goes good, I might have more of them on my channel, but we'll see. All right, that's all for now. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into the series as long as y'all did. I know the second one wasn't that long. It was very short. I couldn't help that. The weather conditions, the snowstorm knocked off my internet, and so I ended up. I try to play more of this, but it ended up not recording the sound, and I ended up having technical difficulties, and so I just used what I had, but nobody really complained about it. It was a 20-minute video. They were happy. So, but anyway, I ended this video here, this video series here. I got what I want out of it. I just wanted to mostly so you can see the arguments in this video was really, really bad. My personal conclusion on this video is that she spent over about half of the video talking about the global flood, which you didn't really have to talk about that in a heat problem because you have to assume our position anyhow in arguing against our position. And so trying to talk about her pet peeves with the global flood, it was completely irrelevant. And then so I had to go all the way to the half of the video, by half of the video, just to get to the crux of our argument. Even she admitted, like she would say something like, "Okay, now this is what this video is really about." Yeah, why didn't y'all just start with that? Why didn't you just do that and not, have to do the other thing? But she was kind of like all over the place in the video. She was elephant hurdling these heat sources at us. She assumed uniformitarian assumptions, like with limestone formation. She seemed to elephant hurdle things like the heat produced from magma hardening, that sort of thing. And so she assumed her uniformitarian assumptions as she was pushing this at us and that sort of thing. Toward the end, she assumed 7 continents when obviously YC positions don't argue for 7 continents; they argue for one. Supercontinent. So you just have to do it from its current position to the position in which it is now, which would have produced only 10 to the 28 joules according to Baumgartner's actual estimated number, and that sort of thing. So it seems like she was trying to elephant hurl this list at us. Now, of course, my GTF model does actually resolve all of the heat sources, the actual heat sources at the flood. I actually, when I first did my model, the first 3 videos showed I used Erica's numbers on the meteor impacts and the accelerated nuclear decay, which was way higher than what it actually was. So I used her maximum number, and my model still worked. Obviously, it would work with a much lesser number as well. And now I kind of went back to using the rate team's actual research and calculating the numbers from that in order to figure out how much stellar decay actually occurred during the flood. Because we don't really need 4.5 billion years worth of stellar decay. We don't even need 500 million years worth of stellar decay. We don't need any of that. That sort of thing. So we don't actually have to have that. In order to argue what we're arguing, because there's lots of problems wrong with radiometric dating. I can get into that. I did get into the comment section with one of the critics on my last video, but there's actually is a number of problems wrong with accelerated decay. And here's the point: we don't need accelerated decay to happen in order to argue against radiometric dating. We can argue against radiometric dating lots of different ways. We can point out dark isotopes, the fact that that known rocks of known ages don't work. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on and on in that area, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to be dealing with stuff like that too in my Fall of Darwinism video. So my Fall of Darwinism video is going to be, oh man, it's going to be incredible. I'm imagining things like of the discussions on the age of the Earth, um, dealing with that sort of thing, dealing with so-called heat problem. So I'll probably be dealing with that a little bit in that series as well. I'll be dealing with arguments that we actually make as well, YACs actually make, and that sort of thing. So it's going to be an awesome series. I'm envisioning how this series is going to work, and it's going to be massive. It's going to be huge. It's probably going to be just as big as my Genesis series was, maybe bigger. I don't know, but it's going to be cool. I can't wait. I am looking forward to it. I think it is awesome, and I just can't wait until I dive into it. All right, but anyway, that's all I have for you for now. Thank you for tuning in. My voice is starting to scratch up a little bit, so it's time to go. I want everyone to know that that I want y'all to be able to tune in. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and important of all, always stay in the know.